To get started, folks in the room, I'll pass this around. Go ahead and sign. You don't have to write down your email unless you aren't already part of the listserv and you'd like to be. So if you're getting emails about all kinds of things, don't feel like you have to take that extra 5 seconds to write your email. Welcome to the tech team meeting today. Glad to see folks. We've got 17 people online. We've got people in the room as well. Can we go around and do quick introductions, your name, your affiliation? And I'll start over here. I'm Angela Gong. I am with Forestry, Fire and State Lands. I'm the Great Salt Lake Program Manager.
I'm Janice Gardner. I'm the Executive Director at Sageland Collaborative.
I'm Linda Freitas, the Executive Director of Friends of Great Salt Lake.
I'm John Left with the Divisional element.
Wayne Wirtspaw from Utah State University.
Andrew Rupke, Utah Geological Survey.
My name is Ashton Johnston. I'm with the Office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner.
I'm Jennifer Briggs. I'm with the Division of Forestry, Fire and State Land.
I'm Sharon Montecino. I'm a student at Utah State University.
Pete Owen. I'm also with UGS.
I'm Alexa Bingenberg, and I'm with UGS.
I'm Jeff Ben Blaker with Jacobs Engineering.
Jim Harris, Division Audubon.
And I'm Whitaker, Forestry, Fire and State Land.
Great. And then we've got folks online. I'll generally bring up their names and I'll try to stumble my way through reading people's names. Comfortable. We've got Brian Rue, Brian V, Fred Miller, Elliot Jagnecki, Emily Clark, Emily Hamel. That's Quad. H, Heather Dove, Heidi Hoven, Jason Hill, Jonathan Lutenbach, Kim Coburn, Layla Amadi, Max Malmquist, Mike Dunphy, is taxing my eyesight, Rob Dubuque, Ryan Doherty, Sarah Null, Sharon's in the room with us, Shelvin Joan online. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited about our agenda today. Some Great Salt Lake updates before we get going. The Great Salt Lake Advisory Council is working on a couple of projects. I know I've talked about these before, but one of the big ones right now is these Lumion videos where we're capturing some success stories about water conservation in the lake. So if you have a story top of mind where you're like, oh, you guys should definitely talk to this person or this organization, come talk to me. We've got a pretty good list right now, and we're starting to reach out to people to get interviews off the ground. But if you have someone where you definitely think they should be on this initial list, let me know, because we are starting right now with the people that we have. We also are in January, that January meeting, whatever that date is, the second Wednesday in January, is, if you're planning on coming in person, it will not be at the Eccles Center. It will be here at DNR, the Eccles Center. We got scooped on that date. So if you're planning on coming in person, I'll send out a reminder and it will be in big letters, but don't show up in person at the Eccles Center or you'll show up at someone else's event. And I don't know what kind of event that is. For the Salinity Salinity Advisory Committee, they are working right now on looking through and approving a salinity management plan. So if you're interested in finding out more, we've got the draft, or if you're interested in hearing how that's going, attend the next Salinity Committee meeting, which will be sometime next year, also January. A quick tech team update. Oh, hello, tech team. You know that our Great Salt Lake research grants, those tech team grants, the deadline got extended because of the federal shutdown. We just wanted to make sure that any of our federal partners or anyone partnering with a federal agency had time to get those in. So that was extended to January 9th. That's a Friday. Coming up shockingly quick. If you're still planning on turning something in, or have any questions about that, reach out and get that in by January 9th. It'll bump out our timeline by about a month. So our scoring subcommittee will start looking at those the very next week. And we're hoping to get final decisions and notification out by the 3rd week of February. Any questions, comments, concerns? Great. Does anyone else have any organizational updates that they want folks in the room or online to know? Okay, great. With that, we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. So Sharon, do you want to kick us off? Our first research update that we're getting to hear about is the Migratory Shorebird survey, which has been gathering data for several years, and this is the latest round that we've got. So take it away.
Thanks, Angela. I'm actually going to start us off here. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to present to this salty group of lake lovers. I think I know most of you, but my name is Max Malmquist. I'm the engagement manager for National Audubon Society's Saline Lakes program. And I'm here today with some close colleagues of mine from Audubon, Sageland Collaborative, and Utah State University to provide an update on the Migratory Shorebird Survey program, which is part of a massive collaborative effort to fill an important data gap on shorebirds and their habitats in the Intermountain West. And before we jump in for the Utah portion of this Westwide project, we want to thank our funders who have supported the work over this last year. This includes the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, Forestry, Fire, State Lands, and their Great Salt Lake research grants, the Division of Wildlife Resources, as well as contributions from our organization, Sageland Collaborative, National Audubon Society, and Utah State University. We also really want to highlight the Division of Wildlife and the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program, who have provided major in-kind support from helping coordinate surveys to helping us with access to conducting aerial and airboat surveys. You name it, the GSUP team has done it. So thanks to them. Also, just want to recognize we've also partnered with over 70 organizations in 10 other Western states who have helped make this program possible. And the first portion of today's presentation, I'm going to provide a big picture overview of the Intermountain West Shorebird Survey. And then Emma's going to summarize this year's Utah-based data. And then the final portion of the presentation will be from Sharon Montecino, who's there in person. Sharon is a master's student, part of the Clark Wolf Lab at Utah State University, who is analyzing the data for this project. And so Sharon is going to share some preliminary results from her work to understand the impact of environmental changes on shorebird distribution and abundance over time. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but many shorebird species make epic biannual migratory journeys, and they take different routes in order to reach Central America, South America, and other non-breeding habitat. And here in Utah, we are in the Intermountain West, which is the interior portion of the Pacific Flyway in North America, and it contains habitats that are critical stopover sites for many species of shorebirds. And shorebirds are a guild or a group of birds that are showing declines at an alarming rate. In North America, shorebirds have declined by about 70% since 1970 from threats including loss of habitat and impacts of climate change. And for shorebirds, these stopover sites are often ephemeral. They change as water levels fluctuate, and areas that were favorable in the past or even in a past season may no longer provide adequate water or food resources at the time when the shorebirds are passing through. And many of these wetlands are gone altogether. You know, unfortunately, we've lost about 50% of the wetlands in the Intermountain West. And many of these wetlands are facing threats from drought and overuse of water. While we know these wetland habitats in the region are important to shorebirds, shorebird use in the region is poorly understood. The last and only time it was systematically surveyed for shorebirds was about 30 years ago. And this is a map on the left from the original study showing the sites that they identified as important to shorebirds. And since 2022, a collaborative effort is well underway to conduct surveys during peak spring and fall migration to better understand current conditions in terms of ecosystem health and shorebird population trends. And these migration surveys, they provide a unique opportunity to get a snapshot of population estimates because shorebirds are funneling through this more defined landscape. And our current effort is replicating that original survey, but we've also expanded to include additional sites to kind of fill out the interior portion of the flyway. And you can see our project scope or map with all of our sites here on the right. And within the Intermountain West, Great Salt Lake, as you guys know, it stands out as one of the most important habitats still available to shorebirds, thanks to its abundant food resources like the billions of brine flies that species like Wilson's phalarope rely on to sustain them through molt and to fatten up for their long migratory journeys south. And without places like Great Salt Lake, simply put, these birds cannot survive their migrations and populations will continue to dwindle. The overall goal of this project is to evaluate migratory shorebird distribution and abundance at Great Salt Lake, but also across the Intermountain West region to provide a foundation for the management of resources for shorebirds. And I won't go into the details here, but we have a number of scales of questions that we're trying to answer with this project, from the regional level down to the local wetland or even wetland unit level, all hopefully to provide valuable information about habitat and shorebird use for managers and decision makers. And now we're going to shift our focus back to the local level here in Utah, and we have 6 survey sites in the state, which are made up of 71 smaller survey areas. We have Amalga Barrens Sanctuary up in Cache County, Blue Lake, Fish Springs National Wildlife Refuge, and Olson Reservoir out in the West Desert. And then we have Utah Lake, which is one survey site that's made up of 6 survey areas. And then here, as you can see on the map, the Great Salt Lake ecosystem is considered just one survey site, but the area is larger than the state of Rhode Island. And we have parsed out the lake into about 61 individual survey areas. And we did that, working with the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program and utilizing survey areas that they have used in past monitoring efforts. And this is the biggest wetland complex in the regional study area. And as you'll see here in a few minutes, it's extremely valuable to shorebirds. So in Utah, we consistently have over 100 expert birders, professional biologists, and volunteers supporting this massive effort each season. That's about a third of our participants across the West. And this provides the public opportunities to get involved with conservation of their public resources at Great Salt Lake. Each season we have a mandatory training. Our amazing communications teams, they maintain a website with a variety of resources, regular newsletters, blogs, social media, all in support of the project. And we also host an end of season social event to thank our partners and volunteers and provide space for networking and connection. As part of that, we do a bird call contest. So if anyone has a good shorebird call that they want to share, please come to our next event after our next season of surveys. The spring survey window is 1 week in April, and the fall survey window is 2 weeks in mid-August, and that's across the entire region. At Great Salt Lake, we strive to get all of our surveys done in one big day. These surveys are completed by vehicle and by foot, and then our friends at the Division of Wildlife, they help us with ATV, airboat, and aerial surveys as well. And I will now turn it over to M. Clark.
Thanks, Max. So as Max just said, we started this iteration of the project in fall of 2022. We have now completed 7 seasons of migration surveys. And after each survey, we create a preliminary report just to provide our partners and land managers with up-to-date information on what we're seeing. So if you would like a copy of any of these past reports, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to share it with you. The fall 2025 report is about to come out this week, and I'll be sending it out to all of our partners. Before I get started with the data, I just wanted to point out that these are preliminary numbers that haven't yet been adjusted for things like observer bias and coverage of survey area, and that they haven't been fully analyzed. So please keep that in mind, that some of the numbers might shift a little bit, but in general, these are the counts that we received. So I'm also going to be presenting just the information from our most recent survey conducted in August. And we had almost 250,000 shorebirds counted across Utah, which is pretty incredible. This was made up of 25 different shorebird species. The most abundant species is the American avocet. We had about 125,000 individuals counted, which makes up about 14% of our total count. The next most abundant species are the Wilson's phalarope and red-necked phalarope. The Wilson's phalarope had about 39,000 individuals counted, making about 14% of the total count this season, and red-necked phalarope were close behind with about 36,000 birds, making up about 13% of the total count. It's important to note that these birds can be really difficult to tell apart and at a distance, and so we also have a phalarope group category, which another about 10,000 individuals were recorded, making up another 3% of the total count. But in addition to these large counts of shorebirds, the survey is also able to pick up really fine-scale data. So for example, we had some rare shorebirds passing through this past season, the ruddy turnstone and red knot, which are just occasional migrants through Utah. And so the survey is also able to pick up that type of information as well, which is pretty great. So let's take a look at our initial abundance and distribution maps across Utah and focusing on the Great Salt Lake. This map shows the abundances and distributions of shorebirds based on the saturation of the color. So the lighter areas represent areas that had lower counts of shorebirds, and the dark blue is the areas with the highest counts of shorebirds. You can see on this map in the sort of lower right corner on the eastern portion of the lake, we have the highest counts at Farmington Bay North and South, as well as Antelope Island Causeway South. And these are all lands managed by Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So jumping into this a bit more, the survey covers areas that are managed by both state, federal, as well as private partners. And I want to point out that a whopping 81% of shorebirds counted were on the sovereign lands managed by Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So it's a huge amount of shorebirds fall into this category. The next most abundant was lands managed by Division of Wildlife Resources with a little bit over 9% of the count. And our third most important area for counts was our private duck clubs, which supported over 5% of our total counts. And this just shows how important the survey areas are for providing data to Forestry, Fire, and State Lands about their management areas, so we can make sure that it gets included in things like management plans and work at the individual level. This is really important as shorebird populations are in decline and more species are being prioritized in Utah. Sorry, you can go back. Thanks. So to emphasize our priority species, the third iteration of the Utah Wildlife Action Plan for the period of 2025 to 2035 was recently revised this summer with the help of over 35 conservation partners. And specifically in response to the threats and declines of shorebirds, the update included 3 more species to the greatest conservation need list. They also introduced a new list this time called the greatest information need list, which include an additional 7 species of shorebirds. So there's a huge draw for this type of information on these priority species. This table shows the species that are considered greatest conservation need or information need, as well as their total count and the areas which have the highest abundance of shorebirds. So we can get very fine scale information about these birds down to the management unit level. Go ahead.
Hey, can we ask questions?
Sure, we could take a quick question or we can wait till the end.
Well, I might not remember. So, but it's back there. Could you, what's the, could you explain the greatest conservation need? And does that relate to total counts? Because there's like some counts there, which is like, 48 greatest conservation need makes sense. And then there's some with these like hundreds, 100,000.
Right. So this is actually from the wildlife action plan that the state produces. So through a process of prioritization and looking at, what's going on in terms of data that's coming out and what we're seeing, because of really large declines in shorebird populations, they come up with priority lists of species that they want to know more information about or that they want to prioritize for conservation. And so this is just showing which species from this Utah Wildlife Action Plan are that we are getting this type of information out, and then we can share this directly with our partners.
Okay.
So, does that make more sense? So
So the needs aren't related to this survey. You're just showing the survey results.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
exactly. No problem. Yeah. So those are just the species that are most sort of in need of more information and that we really want to prioritize for conservation. So they might have very small numbers of shorebirds for that species or very large numbers. And we're going to take a closer look at that now, showing some of these priority species. So this map, again, is the abundance and distribution for the American avocet. And you can see the areas of dark blue is Farmington Bay, which has the highest concentrations of this bird. And this is because it tends to have their preferred foraging habitat of sort of these shallow open waters. And we can go, yep. So next we have the abundance and distribution map for phalaropes. In this case, they're combined because they're often seen together in the same survey areas. And you can see that little area of dark blue on the eastern side, that's Antelope Island Causeway South, which is incredibly important for them. And then on the western side of the lake, you can see the area around the Carrington Island also has really high abundances of phalaropes. And again, this is where their preferred habitat areas are, as well as large concentrations of brine flies for foraging. And now we'll take a look at one more priority species. This is the snowy plover. And they prefer sort of the open expanses of mud flats, and they will pick small invertebrates more out of the ground rather than usually in the water or in very, very shallow water. So you can see that this bird is utilizing totally different habitats than some of the larger shorebirds. This is Black Rock is the area with the highest concentration in fall, as well as the Stansbury mud flats are really important for shorebirds. And so as we move to the from the information gathering into how to implement our management actions, we need to make sure that we're prioritizing all sorts of different habitats for shorebird conservation, because shorebirds have very diverse foraging tactics, which means that they're utilizing different habitats. So we can't just prioritize a single area. We have to make sure we're covering that range of habitats. Now I want to point out the importance of Great Salt Lake. Sharon, if you can go back. Yeah, thank you. The importance of Great Salt Lake amongst the rest of the Intermountain West. So this table shows the survey season year, the number of sites surveyed, and then the Great Salt Lake ecosystem count, as well as the final column on the right, we're looking at the total count for the Intermountain West. And I will just draw your attention back to those percentages in bold. This shows the proportion of the total count that the Great Salt Lake ecosystem alone makes up. So you can see From these numbers, that the Great Salt Lake ecosystem supports a large proportion, or in many cases, the majority of all shorebirds counted across the entire region. And when we look at the more fine scale, Great Salt Lake is usually the single most abundant site across the entire region in most seasons. Now you can move forward. And this map just highlights this a little bit more, makes it a more visual representation of the table. This map shows the regional count comparison by all of the survey sites. The red circles indicate the areas were the most abundant. So the smaller circles indicate the lower abundance scale, and the larger circles indicate areas of higher abundance. So you can see the Great Salt Lake is one of the largest circles on the map. We had over 270,000 shorebirds counted this August. And then the next most abundant site is that other large dot in Southern California. That is the Salton Sea. And they were the next most abundant site, but they had about 100,000 shorebirds counted. So the Great Salt Lake is incredibly important for shorebirds, and we need to make sure that the habitat stays healthy enough to support this amount of shorebirds into the future. And now Sharon's going to tell us about how some of this information compares to the historical surveys.
Thank you, Em. Yeah, okay, so now let's look at the preliminary data, comparing the surveys from 30 years ago with those from today. The original surveys were conducted across 162 sites. Please note that we are actually surveying more sites than they did 30 years ago, and yet the maximum counts across the region are lower in both seasons. And this makes sense when we look at the changes in shorebird abundances at the site or even at the species levels, as we will see in the following slides. So this is a comparison between the sites holding over 1,000 shorebirds in the past and the current surveys. And this comparison reveals that of the 38 sites that held these numbers in the past, 22 are no longer sustaining those quantities. And in the current surveys, 32 sites have over 1,000 birds, but 15 of them are new sites. And however, most of them were not surveyed in the past. So the new site doesn't necessarily indicate that they increased in their bird abundances. And when we look at the details of the percent change in shorebird abundances in the historical and the current surveys, we see that the most sites have indeed experienced declines, and only a few of them support more birds today than 30 years ago. And I want to highlight an interesting case is here in Owens Lake. Remember that a few decades ago, this wetland was almost completely drained. And after years of dust mitigation and recovery of the water flows, we can now see that it once again provides habitat for shorebirds or for many other waterbirds communities. And here are some other examples from a few sites in other states. Note that the differences between seasons could be associated with migration peaks, which are usually better captured in spring than fall. This is because after breeding, some shorebirds migrate more scattered in time, so the abundances vary in fall, and with flocks of males or females who arrive first, etc. So in this part of the table, which is just an extract of the entire table, I want to highlight the changes in the Great Salt Lake ecosystem, which, as Em pointed out earlier, is one of the most important sites for shorebirds across the Inner Mountain West region. And likewise, these pictures show the average surface water from 1984 to 1994 at the Great Salt Lake in the left side of the screen, and including the period when the former survey was placed. And it's comparing that with the other side of the screen, is comparing with the average surface water in 2023, which, remember, was a year of significant rises in water levels. So, well, in the upcoming analysis of my thesis, we will assess whether these changes and other environmental factors are related to changes in the shorebird abundances or not. And in summary, when we analyzing the change at a larger geographical scale than the site level, specifically, this is across the entire Intermountain West region, we found that shorebird abundances decreased on average by 69% in fall and by almost 77% in spring between the historical and the recent surveys. And well, using the same database, we have also analyzed the species and taxonomic groups across the entire region. And most of them show consistent declines except for phalaropes, which are not included in this graph because they represent an special case that we can discuss later. But as we can see, even when American avocet is the most abundant species across the Great Salt Lake ecosystem, that species is also declining by around 55 or 77% across the Intermountain West. So similar situation for dowitchers and some sandpipers. And well, it means that we are not only losing rare species, but also common species, really common ones. And if we look at the species level rather than the groups, we can see some increases in abundances, some of them. And the same is true if we look at the details side by side across the region. But something which is important is note that some species that show increases, such as the semi-palmated sandpiper or sanderling, are not common in the Intermountain West. So changes in their abundances in this region don't indicate substantial increases or decreases in their populations across the hemisphere. So some of them use other migratory routes, such as the Atlantic Flyway, for example. And we could also explore the data across the states. And this is just an example of the total birds, the total shorebirds per site and species in Utah. And in the first histogram on the left side of the screen, we can barely see the other sites different than Great Salt Lake, because Great Salt Lake accounts for most of the birds. So yeah, we can barely see the other colors. And well, remember that Great Salt Lake ecosystem comprises 61 subsites, survey areas, including Bear River Migratory, Bird Refuge, Farmington Bay, Antelope Island, some different duck clubs, among others. And the histogram on the right side of the screen shows the species most represented in the state, in Utah, with phalaropes and American avocets being the most predominant, but also black-necked teal and other. Also, these are just examples of what we can do using that data. So for American avocet, for example, this is a graph at the really specific species level. We can even break down how important Utah and especially the Great Salt Lake are to their populations across the region. In this graph, we are comparing the abundances with other states. And you can see that Utah is one of the most important. And also we can see the changes in total abundances between the historical period of surveys and the recent period. So it makes sense when we talk about the declining populations. So, and well, overall, for the 4 sites with historical and recent data in Utah, which are Red Salt Lake, Fish Spring, Utah Lake, and Amalga Barrens, the percentage in fall indicates a 78% decrease, and in spring, around 85% decrease. And Red Salt Lake and Fish Spring are the sites with the most significant decline in Utah between these 4 sites that I mentioned. And while Utah Lake and Amalga Barrens now record even more shorebirds during the fall than in the past, if we look at the details. And well, to summarize, as you all know, saline lakes ecosystems support hemispherically significant percentage of shorebirds. And in our first 7 seasons of surveys between 2022 and fall 2025, around 90% of all the shorebirds counted across the region occurred at these 9 sites, 7 of which are saline lakes in 4 different states, in Oregon, Nevada, California, and Utah. And if we sum it up, if we add it up all together, almost 50% were counted in the Red Salt Lake during these last 7 seasons. So, well, what's next? As we continue to conduct surveys over the next year, we will have more robust regional comparisons, and we'll use the Intermountain West Joint Ventures wetland evaluation tool to compare our counts to surface water levels, as I indicated earlier. And we are especially interested in connecting this study with other research going on at the Red Salt Lake. We plan to compare shorebird distribution with Phragmites coverage and management. And ultimately, we hope this data will help prioritize wetland and water management at both local and also at regional scales. So we will conduct also the percentage analysis at the subsites level, for example, in Red Salt Lake, because we have part of that data from the historical survey, so we can do that at that more specific geographical scale. And yeah, that's part of the preliminary results. So thank you, and we will value your comments or questions.
Thank you so much, Max, Sharon. Questions for the team?
I have one. Kind of 2 questions. One, that it's a very dramatic decline you guys have found. Do you guys have a sense of the drivers of that decline?
Not yet. I mean, we have some ideas, but the analysis that I will be conducting is going to compare that decline, is going to relate to the declines with environmental changes. So, for example, we saw the changes in the surface water level using the wetland evaluation tool. So that is an idea. It shows that there are also dramatic declines in water surface levels across the entire region. So we are going to relate to that, but we don't have the answer yet. But we will do that analysis with surface water levels and also with some other environmental metrics.
And then are you going to, so I feel like for the flyway, we're kind of in the middle between their summer habitats and their breeding habitats and their wintering habitats. Are you going to account for potential impacts outside of the flyway?
Not at this point. In this case, this analysis, it's aimed to show how are the changes and what is the address of the changes, the direction of them, and the magnitude of them. But we are not considering data on breeding areas or wintering areas. So it's mostly focused in the stopovers and migration, or it can be also important for some residents, like American otter, for example, which is a species that migrate but just most of them like locally or not so far than others. So yeah, but it's a huge database, so there are many possible questions to answer. It's yeah.
I'll just add to that too. I mean, some of our partners are studying these birds on their wintering grounds. For example, Point Blue Conservation Science is part of a large collaboration of groups that are monitoring these birds in their wintering locations along the Pacific coast. So there are analyses that we can do, kind of compare our numbers during migration to at least overwintering numbers. But I think, that's one of the challenges with shorebirds is because they are utilizing habitats across the entire hemisphere, it's really hard for us to pinpoint the reasons for their declines. But, one of the things I think we can do is that for the part of the year that they are relying on these interior wetlands like Great Salt Lake, we can at least try to inform, management and conservation efforts to protect the habitats and the food resources that they need during that particular stage of their annual cycle.
I was wondering, along with drought and water use and impacts to habitats, with land use, adjacent land use. I noticed with the long-billed curlew, I think you only saw 6 of them, or it was a single-digit number. And I was just thinking, they're an upland bird. There's a lot happening with those adjacent landscapes and that kind of habitat. So land use issues.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Lynn. And like species like long-billed curlews, they do rely kind of, at least during the breeding season, on those adjacent upland areas. And I think hopefully this is something that could be utilized. I mean, that's a species of greatest conservation need in the state of Utah. The numbers were quite low this season. I know we've also hit higher counts, but when thinking about changes in land use, especially with those kind of buffer adjacent upland areas, hopefully this kind of information can help inform decisions that are made when it comes to land use.
Thank you. Amazing work. Amazing work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good. At a time where water is becoming more and more managed, are we getting a better handle on how long water needs to be on a mud flat or playa for food items to come and then thereby attract the shorebirds?
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. I would say that's not specifically part of this project, but there are we want to share this knowledge, these outcomes with some other projects, and there is people studying like the brine flies stuff and bioenergetic projects. So there are some other research going on at Great Salt Lake, but I think the result from our research is gonna give us an idea about management related to water, maybe because we are gonna compare how the surface water levels are changing and if they are related to the changes in turbid abundances. And something that is great about the wetland evaluation tool is that it also provides some information about the depth of the water, so we can maybe get an idea about if it's not just water, it's shallow water, or how deep we need like that habitat is at least for shorebirds. Right. So yeah, I think it's
that's more of the bioenergetic study focus. That's what we're looking at, is how long it takes to propagate those areas with food items for shorebirds. So.
The Salton Sea had roughly the same number of birds as Great Salt Lake, but it's only about a third the size in the area.
Yeah.
What's the attraction there?
Yeah, That's interesting. And yeah, in one of these, I think this one shows like Salton Sea is around a half maybe than Red Spot Lake.
Does Max want to answer? Max Malmquist was just there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can add a little bit there. So, Salton Sea is seeing significant declines. They're seeing pretty extreme changes in habitat. Because the sea is declining at a pretty fast rate, they're actually seeing an increase in shorebird habitat. So there's return flows from agriculture. We're seeing some more kind of sheet flow habitat, mud flats that are being created. So, and I think, the food resources have changed at the sea over time as well. I mean, you guys know it used to be a fishery, lots of piscivorous birds, fish-eating birds. And I know that, the types of macroinvertebrates that are available at the sea are changing over time as the salinity increases. So, this is fall from 2025. I think we actually had a fall count at Salton Sea in 2023 of 250,000 shorebirds. So as the sea changes, we're seeing some really interesting changes in habitat and shorebird numbers. And I think Audubon, California actually just released a study looking at some data specifically at Salton Sea. I believe it was just published. I can try to find a link to that and I'll try to put it in the chat.
Thanks, Max. There was a comment and a question in the chat. One was, just FYI, long-billed curlew were incredibly abundant at Antelope Island this past season. And then a question from Heather Dove, are these results shared with policymakers, the state, the Port Authority, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, they are not yet. My thesis is still in process, so those are preliminary data. Even if most of them show really interesting declines and stuff that it's probably not going to change that much in the future. They change some numbers, but not that much. But we will publish this data once the thesis is done. So it's going to be published during the first semester of next year. So not yet, but
we do through these meetings.
Oh,
we have
sorry,
meetings with the commissioner, we provide regular updates. So not in a formal peer review way, but yes, to answer Heather's question, yes. Sorry to jump in. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, just trying to jump in there. So yes, we have all of our seasonal reports that we share out to as many people are interested. So if you think there's someone who should receive that report, please let me know. I'd be happy to pass it along. Again, with the caveat that these are the preliminary numbers and that we are working to do the analysis of the full survey now, which is what Sharon was referring to, but we certainly send out updates and we try to stay current with all the information. And I'll just comment on the long-billed curlew question that there were a lot at Antelope Island. So the survey is kind of the snapshot picture of what is happening on a certain day within the migration window. So we conduct surveys within certain windows. So sometimes we catch the birds at the highest abundance and sometimes they might not be as high, but that evens out throughout the survey as all of the surveys are done during the same time. So it's trying to look at the sort of the larger picture of what's going on across the region, if that helps.
Yeah, and long-billed.
Also, could I add on? Sorry, go ahead, John.
Sorry, John, speak louder and then we'll have Heidi.
Yeah, I just was gonna say the long-billed curlew is just in locations that aren't typical to what we do on the shorebird surveys, which is the shores of the lake. Rather, they're in the upland areas and in the ag areas. That's where they primarily feed. So it's hard to get long-billed curlews on our maps.
Thank you. Heidi, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this discussion for the long-billed curlews that so at Gilmore Sanctuary, we have a mix of saline wetlands and uplands. And in the past, we've had lots of breeding pairs of long-billed curlew and with successful hatching and raising their colts. If that's what they're called, actually, I'm not sure, they're chicks. But anyway, the last few years, we have not seen any breeding, maybe just one pair 2 years ago. And so it's a really dramatic decline. And so all these comments are really important, even that they were seen as incredibly abundant in Antelope Island. Wendy, that's awesome to know that maybe they're shifting to that habitat and still using it. But there's many places around the lake that are being influenced by the encroachment of human development and all that comes with it. These are incredibly sensitive birds, more so than other shorebirds. And they're perhaps being pushed to their final, spots that they can use. But, for many, many things going on, I think that this is very representative of, their state as a population.
I had a question. Max, I think it was you who were talking about the windows of the observations. Are those the same as the ones 30 years ago, or have they adjusted or shifted at all to capture possible changes with climate change, with birds adjusting the timing of their migration?
That's a great question. So, I think historically I think they were targeting broader windows, so it might have been a little bit more variable. With our current survey effort, Audubon's National Science Team, before the project, we actually looked at eBird status and trends data across the region, also at the individual state level, at the 30 or so, common shorebird species, to identify these windows based on peak abundance and peak diversity. And, there's, of course, these shorebirds all have different timing in their migrations. Weather can be a big role, especially play a big role, especially in the spring. So, phalaropes, their timing is off. Wilson's phalaropes, they migrate in the fall a little bit before our window. Redneck phalaropes a little bit after. So we're not going to be able to hit all these species right on, but we're trying to do the best we can. And it's not as clear that they had as defined windows in the historic surveys. I think, technology, communication was a little bit different back then. And so I think the timing was maybe a little bit different, but it's a very good point and something to, maybe a caveat for the data as well.
Yeah,
that's like the strength of this, is that it's like everyone in the region is doing these surveys at the same time. So you're comparing apples to apples. It's a relative comparison. So even if you're hitting or missing the migratory peak, you're still comparing apples to apples, because everyone in 11 states is counting birds in the same small window.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that question, because that's the question that I've had. And that's why the ecosystem program does multiple surveys. And we even noticed this year that our limited surveys that we did prior to the shorebird survey caught a lot more birds before the actual shorebird survey. So we knew that they had migrated or moved on. The other thing that besides the bioenergetic study that we've been doing is I have working with a postdoc at USU to assess our surveys and the amount of surveys that we do to try to ensure that we're hitting the right, finding the right window, because we've had to scale back our surveys over the years from the original 5-year waterbird surveys that Don Paul did. Those were 17 periods, 47 different sites, or 50 or something like that, which was a lot, and we just couldn't keep that up. So we've scaled that back, but I'm afraid we're starting to, with the climate change, miss windows. And so I want that postdoc to look and see how we can be the most efficient with what we do. So, and this helps us get a better picture of it, especially at a larger scale. So, and I also like your question too, because I want to know what is going on in the breeding and wintering areas, because we're just a migratory or a transition zone. So it'd be nice to know what's going on, where they're breeding, and if we could capture some of the fluctuations there to see if that's impacting populations, so.
Yes.
I just want to add to that about the data about the dates of peak migration. We are also accounting for that in the analysis. We are using as a covariate the date of the peak migration by species and by site, based on the status and trends that Max mentioned earlier. So yeah, we are also accounting for that kind of possible bias into the analysis about percent change.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much. There is a comment in the chat, someone asking to be added to the report listserv. So
yes, I saw that. Thank you so much. I will add you.
Okay, thank you to this whole team and the representative, the huge effort that this is. Really appreciate it. Next up, we've got a report on brine fly monitoring. So sort of where we've been coming from and what's happening next. And that's with a team from Westminster University. So that's Sofia, Bella, and Bonnie. And I see Bonnie online. So go ahead and take it away.
Hi there. I'm trying to get my slides to share and I'm having trouble. It's asking me to record. If I can do one. Oh, this is on top. I guess it's a recording permission that has to be granted in my security options, which might mean I need to go out and come back. This is going to be no fun without the slides, guys. I'm trying to deny. It won't let me deny. Man. Okay. Yeah, I'm stuck with an error message on my screen that I can't get rid of. So,
Bonnie, do you want to try sending me the slides real quick?
Yeah. Let me do that. Can I put it on Google Drive and just?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead and try that. Everyone's getting a cookie, so it's getting messy.
Oh man. Okay, good. Go get your cookies. If I can get this to go off my screen, I can go out and come back again. All right, see you in a minute.
Oh, where are you guys at on the bio? How much?
Probably wrap it up in the next year.
Oh, that would be
So did I hear correctly that you guys will like characterize depths that suit certain species or saturation time requires?
Yeah, that's the intent. It's not as extensive as I would have liked to have seen it, but it is so hard to get out and get samples.
Yeah. I got something to run by. I'd love to pick your brain about after the say.
Yeah.
Some little baker. Coffee shop. So I'll also ever get a pastry and I like an espresso. Oh, that'd be amazing. Hard beyond.
very true.
So then we can just be an ecologist and just become bakers again.
There we go. You can see it now.
I just had to go out and come back. Sorry.
Great.
You are presenting. Show my screen anyway. Does everybody see me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Good. Oh, now I can't operate my screen there. Okay. Yay. Okay. Sorry there for a minute. I hate technical difficulties, but here we are. I wanted to give you an update on what's going on with fly monitoring. We had some funding back in 2023 from Forestry Fire State Lands, and so I have two students here today, Sofia Rand and Bella Willis, that are going to talk about our current monitoring efforts. But since we had funding a couple years ago, I wanted to sort of lay out the sort of where we are with fly work in general and what's happening. And I want to invite anyone who wants to come to the fly party and be involved to please do so. We're really talking mostly about Ephedra gracilis here, although I'll mention the Ephedra genus with respect to the wetlands as well. So we're talking about in this talk about monitoring flies that live in the lake. So if we think about the open water of the South Arm, we're looking at two food chains, and we're really talking about this fly-based food chain and the microbialite mats that they feed on. Thanks to Scott Baxter for this lovely photo. These flies feed so many birds, and they're so important in this ecosystem. And round about 2022, 21, when things got really bad, I started making a lot of noise about the flies because I was out studying microbialite. So here's the asterisk: I don't actually study flies. I study what they eat. But what we know, and this is a graphic made from some work that Max and John Neal also worked on to put together some Excel spreadsheets for National Audubon, but we extrapolated that and made this into a little graphic to show you that 7 species of birds who are at the lake in great numbers really depend on the brine fly. And of course, because of the petition, the Endangered Species Act petition for Wilson's phalarope, we really need to understand the brine flies and their part in sustaining the phalarope. So good flies, good birds, everybody's happy all the way around. Of course, they're eating my microbialites, but I will get over that. The microbialite serves as food for the larva, but also a place to latch on and to pupate. And so this life cycle illustrates how important this benthic area of the lake is to the flies. They spend like 6 to 9 months in the water and only a few days as an adult fly. So really they spend most of their life underwater. So when I started raising alarm bells about this back in 22, it was because we were seeing these mats like just dry and desiccated on the microbialites. And you can see this is from 2016. You can see all the larvae, you can see pupa, you can see how healthy this mat looks with layers of different microbiota. And that's what we used to see all the time. The flies back then were just so numerous around the microbialites, and the phalaropes would sit right above and just munch on the flies. And then things got bad, and even Pat Bagley appreciated my concern and put them on a milk carton, which I thought was hilarious. Also sad. But this year they were back in incredible numbers. And this is really a shout out to how we're managing the salinity of the lake. The flies have really recovered. The microbialites that are underwater, you can see, areas where they're not. The microbialites that are underwater are recovering and growing really thick mats again. So water is important to keep on top of them, but also the salinity is important to keep at a healthy level. There's really been limited work done on ephedra before. Wayne's lab has done a few studies. An important one is just looking at salinity and brine flies and how the salinity, how important it is to keep the salinity at a reasonable level for their health. Heidi is working on E-hyans, on ephedra hyans, which is not as salt tolerant. So I wanted to mention this because Heidi's on the call, and she may be able to answer any questions you have about that. But she's been working with us upon occasion, coming and using our microscopes, been here when we've had collaborators, and we love the conversations that we've had with Heidi. Amanda Barth is also on the call, and she really made some big movement this year, getting several insects, but including ephedra gracilis, changed their conservation status to vulnerable in this 2025 Utah Wildlife Action Plan. And now it's on paper that these are a keystone species for the lake. Great Salt Lake is a key habitat, and even microbialates make a special appearance in this document as a specialized key habitat. So back in 2023, we were funded on a Hot Topics grant, and one of the things we wanted to do was develop monitoring methods, form collaborations, and to create a system whereby we could have measurements of numbers of the population, numbers of flies that hatch, pupil density, all those sorts of things to start to quantify what we were seeing, to choose sites that would be useful for collecting these data over time. And I was able to get, even before that funding, Dave Herbst out here to start working with us. Dave says his title is Lord of the Flies. But really he is the world's ephedra specialist. And he had studied these flies at Mono Lake, these alkali flies, hyans at Mono Lake. He'd studied hyans angracilis and Mojave salt ponds. He'd been to Walker Lake, Lake Abert up in Oregon. But he had not worked at Great Salt Lake. And so it was really fun to have him here and start this collaboration. He's an independent contractor, mostly retired and playing guitar now, but I really am grateful that he spent some time with us. So thanks to Forestry Fire State Lands for supporting that grant, which got us to bring Dave out here, but also Friends of Great Salt Lake and the National Audubon Saline Lakes helped in his first visit to support his housing and food and so forth. So that was really helpful as well. So Dave has really been instrumental in helping us develop monitoring methods. Also Carly Beadle, who was our former Great Salt Lake Institute coordinator, seen here on Halloween. She was so excited about brine flies that she went as one for Halloween. She had a background in entomology, and she really led our first work on monitoring, being the point person for Dave and our students. And Dave sent her down to BYU to do some measurements of flies that were in their insectary and their collections, so that we could understand the size of the flies like in the 1960s and how they might be different now. And we also, from Dave, learned a lot of microscopy methods and looking, counting not just larvae, but sorting out the different instars of the larva. You can see these tiny little instars are much smaller than the giant pupa that is here. And we've got brine shrimp cyst for scale. That's for John Luft. And Dave also taught us how to collect adults and how to fix them and store them for future use. So working with Dave was super helpful to get us set up in our methods. We got to explore lots of different sites around the lake and think about how to do this work. Carly was quite a baker. In fact, she left GSLI to go to pastry school, which I think is fantastic. And she had the idea of using silicone baking pans to make artificial substrates. So Dave had been doing some stuff with concrete at Mono Lake, but this made the size very consistent. And you can see how the flies will pupate after this has been in the lake for a while. So you'll have the pupa right on these blocks. And when the concrete is drying, you just put a little metal loop in so that you can hook it to this. So we designed a couple of different PVC models. And this was the one that we finally decided worked the best. We called it Medusa because of all the strings coming off of it, where we would clip on the blocks like this. We take them out of the pans. And this, we mitered this to make it angled so it would go in the lake sediment. This is one that is now deployed at Mono Lake. Because they don't have a drastically changing lake level, they can keep it in shallow water where the flies like to be, and they use zip ties, but we've been using longer strings because of our elevation changes. Many of you know Georgie Corkery, our current Great Salt Lake Institute coordinator. She's currently in Argentina at Montecino at this Saline Lakes Education Conference. But I'm speaking in her stead, so she's really leading the student team on fly monitoring now. And we've been coordinating with this team at Mono Lake. So I wanted to say a word about them. Obviously, this comes from Dave has trained those guys, and Georgie and I decided that we really needed to coordinate so that we're doing monitoring in the same way. And this makes USGS happy because they would like to standardize monitoring across all of these saline lakes. So Christine and company have been coming along on some of these excursions. Meet Stevie and Robbie from the Mono Lake Committee. You may or may not have been subjected to this, but we do have a consensual tutu policy at the lake, and you'd be surprised by how many people say yes. But Steve and Robbie spent a week with us, and we mostly were in the south arm of the lake, but we did take them up to Spiral Jetty to see that part. We took them to the Friends of Great Salt Lake fundraiser, so here they are here. And Christine and I took them out to dinner. So we spent a good week with them, having fun meeting Great Salt Lake people, but also out in the field. I think Connor might be in the room. John left, maybe you should take this picture if you want, but we're also working with the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program. Connor's not only afraid, he's not afraid to wear a tutu, nor is he afraid to hold our emotional support chicken, which also goes in the field sometimes. Whoops. If you are not doing science in a tutu, you're really missing out. That's all I'm saying. So just to point out, we're working with GSLAP, we're working with USGS on this. We're trying to keep all the information on the table. We're trying to coordinate with Mono Lake. This is the kind of results that we would like to have per sample site. We've been exploring at different sample sites and doing counts and getting geared up for this next year. And so at Mono Lake, for instance, they count per instar, they count the pupil density, and they count emerged adults. And if they do that routinely on X number of blocks, so X amount of surface area, then they can compare each site to the other sites. So that's the kind of data that we will get from this coming year. So I want to turn it over a minute to Sofia and Bella, who are going to talk to you about the field work and the lab work.
Okay, so Georgie, Sofia, and I are still relatively new to the project. So the spring and summer of this year represented our first season in the field monitoring the flies, and we deployed our Medusas, so those PVC pipes with the strings and artificial substrate attached to them, at Ladyfinger Point in the Antelope Island State Park, with collections of these blocks running from May through October. We had 5 Medusas on a transect going progressively into the water, with 5 concrete blocks of artificial substrate attached to each Medusa. Every month we'd harvest 1 block from each Medusa and bring it back to the lab to process and count our samples.
So I will go over our lab work, which is separated into 2 phases. The first being sample processing. We had our initial methodology that we used this last season, but we came across some complications with that. So I'll go over both of those as well as the changes that we'll be making this next season. So as Willis said, we'd go out once a month and we'd collect a block from each Medusa, and we'd place them into a Ziploc bag and then bring them back to the lab for processing, where we would then rinse each block with boiling water to get the specimens off the block. And then anything that was left behind, we would use a brush to just wipe them off. And then we would strain the samples and put them into 2 jars of 80% ethanol, one which is 3/4 of the sample, and then one which is 1/4. Our intention with that was to count a subset of each sample rather than counting them all. And then from there, we just move on to the counting step per usual. Some complications that we came across with this was one out in the field. When we put the blocks into a bag, some of the specimens were falling off. So we were losing a small percentage of them in transport, which is not good. And then when we would rinse the blocks with water, like I said, not all of the samples would come off. So we were using that brush to swipe them off, which we found damaged some of the empty pupa casings since they're a lot more delicate than the full counterpart. And additionally, the larvae were not coming into enough contact with the water. So when we first collect them, they're all curled and bunched up, meaning when we go to count them, we have to manually straighten every larva in order to measure them, which was just not time effective. So to fix this, what we'll be doing is wrapping a mesh bag around the blocks when we collect them before lifting them out of the water, so that way things won't fall off. And then for the boiling water step, we will just be totally negating the brush aspect, and if anything's left behind, we will just manually go through and pick them off as best as we can to avoid damaging them. And then we will be adding a second boiling water step, where we will just fully submerge the samples into a pot of boiling water to get those larvae to fully unfurl and straighten out, so that way they're easier to measure. We can be more accurate with that. And then we will be completely doing away with the splitting of the jars into 3/4 and 1/4, not because of any complication, but it was really redundant. The yield that we're producing doesn't require us counting a subset. We can just count the full jar, so we'll do that. And then we will now be storing them in 70% ethanol. Again, not because of complication, but it's just more cost effective to be using less. And then after that, we will be moving on to the second phase of the lab work, which is counting and measuring. We're looking for 4 things, like Bill said, which is the larva, the empty pupa, the full pupa casings, and the adult fly. If you look at the middle picture, the specimen on the very right is the larva, which is what we'll be measuring in 1 millimeter increments. So 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on, all the way up to 13, which we just categorize anything beyond that as 13 plus. And then on the left side of the image is an empty pupa casing, which is relatively easy to identify because when the fly emerges, the end of the casing kind of breaks off. So you can see that under the microscope. And they're also a lot more opaque than the full casing counterpart. The rightmost image is actually a picture of a full pupa casing, which broke in half. So you can see the larva that is inside, but the end of it is a lot more dark than the empty pupa casing. So that's how we identify that. And all in all, we just log them as one of those 4 specimens. And then for the larva, we measure them.
Great. So we faced a couple challenges in the fieldwork portion of this project this year. So unlike Mono Lake, the Great Salt Lake's shoreline recedes quite a bit over the course of the spring and summer, and we're unable to predict exactly how much this will happen. So we just placed our 5th Medusa as far out as we could. And here in our pictures, you can see the difference between the elevation levels in the spring and then in October in our last session harvesting these blocks. You can see my colleague and friend Lauren Rothman carrying our artificial substrate blocks out to that 5th Medusa that was completely submerged. And then in our October picture on the right, you can see that nearly all of the Medusas were entirely out of the water. So come our last sampling session in September and October, these medusas were almost entirely out of the water, which exposed our blocks of artificial substrate to the elements, to the air, and likely skewed the results of what we would find when taking them to the lab. So how are we adjusting to this unique obstacle, and what overall changes do we hope to make as spring rolls around again and we go back into the field? So next field season, we hope to include more field sites on the Great Salt Lake besides just Antelope Island. And I believe that we're currently deciding where those sites will be. And in addition to using our artificial substrate blocks to collect samples of brine fly pupa and larvae, we'll also be using the core sampling techniques that the folks over at the Mono Lake Committee showed us when they came here to Salt Lake in October, using a cylindrical reducer to directly sample the sediment, as you can see Steve showing us in the picture to the left. And then we'll also be improving the blocks and medusas themselves, again, modifying our methods to sort of recreate the success of the folks at the Mono Lake Committee and just to standardize these protocols. We'll be using smaller blocks next season, and while our previous blocks were only textured kind of on the top and some of the sides, we hope to create more crevices for our flies to pupate on, and then we'll place them at a 45-degree angle kind of against the medusa to allow them more surface area and more areas to, again, pupate on, which will hopefully increase our numbers when we take them back to the lab to count. And we also really want to stress the importance of our collaboration with the wonderful researchers over at Mono Lake. They've been truly invaluable to us as we acquaint ourselves with the brine flies and learn how to create protocols or adapt extant ones to assist us in our monitoring efforts. And we hope that this relationship will continue to grow alongside the project. So we're just really grateful for them.
Great. I wanted to mention that thank you guys. That was really good. I want to mention that we also are interested in these microbialites. I should say I'm interested in these microbialites and how the composition of the microbial mat might be influencing pupation or not, providing better food or not. So that's another area that we're looking at. I want to just give a couple slides of follow-up on some things we're pursuing in addition to the monitoring. One is we have a computer science student that worked this summer, Rokia, and with the professor Jing-Sai Lang in computer science here at Westminster University. And he developed a machine learning approach where we could photograph microbialites and train the algorithm to recognize pupa. We're trying to transfer this to the field, so we'd be able to estimate pupil density of microbialites that are naturally in certain areas of the lake, as opposed to the artificial substrates. We also have a partnership with Northrop Grumman, and you might say, why? They are a space and defense company. What the heck are they doing with you guys? They have a technology for conservation program where they turn their engineers towards solving conservation problems. And since they have a presence in Utah, they would like to have one of these conservation programs be in Utah. So because they have headquarters in DC, they do some conservation work on Chesapeake Bay. So we've been partnering with them for a couple of years now, but it's growing in their interest to brine flies. So we had them out recently last month, and we deployed this little guy, which is basically a sonde, an environmental probe that many of us use anyway, hooked up to a telemetry station so that the data can be real-time sent to your cell phone. And we had to set up two other in sightline boxes so that the telemetry would work. So Our hope is to deploy these around the lake and to hook up some sensors to them that will give us more information about not just the environmental parameters that we're recording in real time, but maybe even the birds that are present. So here's Christine Rumsey out with us. Here's Georgie, and here's the couple guys from Northrop Grumman. And there's Wally out there all by himself, so lonely, enjoying the sunset. So this was just a one-day demo. It's not something we left in the lake. Some of you in the room were there. We invited out Angela and folks from Fizzle and folks from GSLEP and University of Utah collaborators and USGS. So we had a number of people on site for this deployment to see how it all went. This is kind of what we're imagining, that we would have that SON Pro, but then we would, and it is solar powered, so this telemetry station would send information back. But maybe we also could have our underwater camera doing pupil density photography, that we could bring these images back to the lab and run our algorithms. And we also could have a bird listening device, such as one of these acoustic monitoring devices, that can tell us what bird species were present. And then we can start to correlate all of that with environmental parameters on the lake. And my silly acronym for this is Floating Lake Innovative Equipment Stations. So we'll see if that makes it past the bar. Also, we continue to work with Kirsten Verster. We had a little fly lunch at the last Great Salt Lake Issues Forum where I invited Kirsten, and Dave Herbst gave her his fly collection. She's been doing genomics, sequencing the genomes of all of the species of ephedra, and so I collected flies for her up at Lake Abert. And we've hosted her out at Great Salt Lake, and here she is in California, totally covered in mud. But she's here for it, and I think in terms of genomic approaches and understanding these flies and understanding the genes that allow them to live at high salt, it's going to be really cool. So that's just another angle of things that we're doing. And I just would like to leave this here, and our students doing interpretive dance for each life stage of the flies. Thanks to students in this, there's Cade in here. He really hasn't done a lot of work on the flies, but he makes a great fly. Lauren Rothman's really helped out a lot on this. She's in the middle as the pupa. There's Bella on the right as a larva. But also missing is Kimber Jeffrey, who worked with Heidi a lot out at Gilmore on snowy plovers this past summer, but she's also really been helping a lot with the fly monitoring. So thanks to them.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, and your whole team.
Yeah.
You know, brine flies have been important forever, but I think sort of moving them into the broader consciousness. Questions for this team? Yeah.
More of a comment, but Bonnie, you can comment back. So brine flies have been studied better in Mono Lake than they have here. So a lot of these comments about that. And in Mono, the flies occur down to a depth of about 25 or 30 feet. So it's not just a shoreline phenomena. And secondly, more so at Mono, it seems, than here, although we don't have good data, is that there's a lot of brine flies on the sediments, mud and sand. So it's just not a microbial-like issue entirely. We've got a lot more sand and mud than we do microbialites. So down the road, sometime we need to look back at that. When we studied the brine flies 15 years ago, whatever it was, we only found maybe 5% as high a densities on the soft substrates as the microbialites. But that's not the case at Mono Lakes. And we, back when, we didn't do all that much sampling. So we should be looking more at that too.
Yes, and I think there's several differences with the two different species at Mono and Great Salt Lake as well. So certainly they don't have the microbialite set up, and that sediment sampling that Steve was helping us with in that slide. I don't know how informative it's going to be at Great Salt Lake because that species at Mono Lake does, has a bit of a different lifestyle. But we do see a lot of brine fly larvae in the sediment in the winter. When it gets cold, they burrow down. So I think we're thinking about monitoring, during spring and summer, but if we continue that into fall, I think the sediment sampling is going to be super interesting. And I do want to point out, I mentioned GSLEP, and I meant to say on that slide that they have counts going back for a really long time of brine fly larvae in the water column. And we've had lots of cool discussions about these because if you're seeing a fly larva in the water column, then it could mean there's a lot of larvae, or it could mean that the density is such that it's harder for them to get to the bottom of the lake. So for instance, GSLEP saw an increase in the larvae in the water column, like with a salinity spike. So we don't really know what that means. And so I think to your point, Wayne, like taking all of these data together is going to be really, really important to understanding how these flies are thriving or not at Great Salt Lake and what they need. And trying to standardize our monitoring efforts with Mono and like Abert as well, I think is going to be crucial. It's a really different system here than Mono, as you know, as well as anybody, because I know you've worked at both places. And so trying to standardize, but realizing what the differences are, that's one of our goals.
One of the advantages of the flies being on the soft sediments is you can sample them with dredges without having to resort to scuba equipment.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've yet to resort to scuba. I really have always thought I would, but I haven't.
Thank you, Wayne. Anybody else, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you so much, Bonnie. And
yeah, sorry we had class and I couldn't be there in person, but so happy to hop on and talk flies with y'all. And anybody who has questions or wants to play along or wear a tutu, just email me, okay?
Great. And thank you to our Migratory Shorebird survey presentation team as well. This has been really helpful and nice to see sort of almost the whole food chain here from the same meeting. If you need to, I know we're after 10:30, so if you need to slip off, please do. Do we have any public comments from anyone in the room or online that may or may not be related to anything in this meeting?
Just a reminder about the Great Salt Lake Issues Forum this coming May 6th, 7th, and 8th at the University of Utah Guest House and Conference Center. So we'll be including a lot of these kinds of discussions and looking forward to seeing you all there.
If anyone misses it because it's not on their calendar,
Don't miss it.
It's not going to be Lynn's fault.
There'll be cookies there too.
These cookies, Lynn?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm there.
Anything else? Okay, great. Any other comments, concerns, questions, confessions before we close? Thank you for being here today. It's a great group. Have a great week. Our next meeting will be February 10th. I made a mistake in the agenda that I sent out, but I'll correct it in the next version that I have. February 10th, that's a Tuesday at 9 a.m. here at GNR, but instead of in this room, we'll be in 112 in Soldier Hollow. So through the scan doors and to the left.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.